in maybe your opinion, or maybe what we're doing here, how are organizations taking actions to reduce scope 3 emissions, but also what does a verification process look like in that sense?
I would say even before taking actions to reduce scope 3 emissions, I think a lot of companies are still working to like get their scope 3 emissions on handle and understand all of their scope 3 emissions. I think for some companies that are really far ahead in this, they've looked at all 15 categories. They've been able to identify of those 15, where is their industry most impacted or has any results in emissions, and they've been able to report on those. But in many cases, a lot of companies are first off trying to understand of the 15 that relate to them in their business, how do they accurately gather and collect that data and then report it out in a standardized way. So I think in many cases, companies are not really reporting all of their scope 3 emissions to the full extent of it, because they're still trying to actually quantify that themselves and account for that themselves. When it comes to just a reduction efforts, I would say that a lot of companies that produce physical products, there's a huge impact when it looks like looking at like their downstream emissions, and you're thinking of the use of their sold products. And then, as we mentioned, end of life treatment of their sold products, finding opportunities to take back those materials into their manufacturing processes and build it into new products that they produce. I've seen as an area where a lot of companies are trying to test out and understand what are the capabilities around that, how does that affect the quality of their new product. But there's a variety of other ways. I think mainly, as we mentioned before, with the pandemic also resulting in like reduced travel, I've seen a lot of companies just taking advantage of reduced travel emissions from their employees, resulting in lower emissions. But that, of course, is potentially won't be for a long period of time. Yeah, I'll pause to add any other
Yeah, no, that
thoughts.
was great. Yeah, I mean, shout out to the Microsoft sustainability team if anyone from over there is listening. You know, that slide that we showed that has that amazing breakdown of all the different categories, like that's very rare. Yeah, and I think that's like a shining example of a company that's just done an amazing job on accounting for emissions across all of those different categories. You know, I think it's super important to develop that understanding, but you know, you don't absolutely have to have that granular of an understanding of your emissions profile to get started. And I think that's also something really important to emphasize. So you know, I think in terms of strategy, you know, a lot of companies and a lot of leaders in this space would say, you know, try to get a handle on what some of those biggest buckets are. You know, if you're and then you know, use that to set your priorities on what to tackle first. And there's a few different industry examples and a few different business examples of how that's been done in practice. So you know, I would say start with high impact, but also don't necessarily neglect to just start with what's easy. And I think that's what really excites us about this whole reuse space, is in that like it's a really easy way to get started, and it shows impact, and there is measurable impact associated with it. So so I think that's another side of it when we're thinking about strategies, is just like find what's impactful 100%, absolutely, but also think about what's easy to implement and just get started.